So this talk that I'm sharing with you this evening is an exploration of being close to the Buddha through reading this chapter of the Dhammapada together. It's an opportunity to practice being close to the Buddha. I noticed that the chapter falls naturally into 4 sections or stages. So if you've been looking at the text, I'll say what those are. So this is chapter 14, whatever version you've got. So verses 179 to 181 or 182 are about the enlightened one or the awakened one. Then from 182 to 185, about the path. 186 to 192, about refugees, about a true refuge. And 193 to 196, about the spiritual community. So I'm going to read each of those sections and then share a bit about them. So for the section on the enlightened one, I'd like to read that and show you some images. So I'm going to share some images with you now. If I can get my technology to work. Okay, now. The enlightened one. The enlightened one, whose sphere is endless, whose victory is irreversible, and after whose victory no defilements remain. By what track can you lead him astray? The trackless one. That enlightened one in whom there is not that ensnaring, entangling craving, leading anywhere in conditioned existence, and whose sphere is endless. By what track will you lead him astray? The trackless one. Those wise ones who are intent on absorption in higher meditative states and who delight in the calm of renunciation, even the gods love them, those thoroughly enlightened and mindful ones. And by a different translation. He is the conqueror who can never be conquered, into whose conquest no other can ever enter. By what track can you reach him, the Buddha, the awakened one, free from all conditioning? How can you describe him in human language, the Buddha, the awakened one, free from the net of desires and the pollution of passions, free from all conditioning? Even the gods emulate those who are awakened, established in meditation. They live in freedom and at peace. So, what we practice there is known as Buddhanasati. And it's one of the ways that we can bring the Buddha closer to our experience, to recall his qualities and to bring in mind, to bring his presence to mind in whatever way we can. For a trackless one, the being known as the Buddha has certainly left his mark. 25 centuries after he lived, the figure of the Buddha has widespread representation in art and architecture in the East. And according to recent figures, 7% of the world's population, or 520 million people, are Buddhists. However, when the Buddha was asked by his disciples how he would like to be remembered, it's recorded that he took off his outer robe, folded it in a cube, took his alms bowl, and placed it upside down on top of the folded robe. And it's believed that this gesture gave rise to the first Buddhist monuments, which were stupas. The other early monument to the Trackless One, paradoxically, was a footprint, an actual impression of a human footprint, as if saying a human being was here, a human being who achieved the seemingly impossible in going beyond suffering and the limitations of the human condition to unbounded wisdom and compassion, and who successfully led others to do the same. So in reading this chapter, we come close to the historical Buddha, to his actual existence, to his lifetime, and to the people who were influenced by him. In the modern era, we as a Western society have become much more aware and concerned about our footprint, both individually and collectively. Expressions such as treading lightly on the earth and leaving no traces have come to the fore. And we've been learning increasingly rapidly and intimately that what we do and don't do for this person in here has a potent and measurable effect on the world out there. It's as if they're one and the same thing. So modern discussion on reducing our carbon footprint. However, the Buddha was trackless because you could say he achieved a state of being with no karmic footprint. So this kind of track or no track takes place in the mind, in mental events and views. In his talks on the Dhammapada, Padmavajra coins the phrase, an ecology of mind. If I was to use a modern expression, I might say there wasn't a selfish bone in his body, because it's self-centeredness or this desire to enhance or protect ourself or self-interest, or what seems to be our self-interest, that causes us to generate new karmic traces. To put it another way, when you're no longer feel compelled to limit yourself to just your own point of view, then you're free to become enlightened. It sounds simple. However, I've found moving beyond believing and acting as if I'm the center of the universe has been more of a challenge than I might have at first thought. So the Buddha it frames this situation in terms of motivation and conduct throughout the Dhammapada and also in this chapter. So I'm going to read the next few verses now, the verses that are talking about conduct of the path. Difficult is the attainment of the human state. Difficult is the life of mortals. Difficult is the hearing of the real truth. Difficult is the appearance of the enlightened ones. The not doing of anything evil, undertaking to do what is ethically skillful, and complete purification of the mind, this is the ordinance of the enlightened ones. Patient endurance is the best form of penance. Nirvana is the highest, say the enlightened ones. No true goer forth is he who injures another, nor is he a true ascetic who persecutes others. Not to speak evil, not to injure, to exercise restraint through the observance of the almsman's code of conduct, to be moderate in diet, to live alone, and to occupy oneself with higher mental states. This is the ordinance of the enlightened ones. So in this second section, the Buddha speaks of occupying oneself with higher mental states. I found this practice to be a multi-layered journey. I found that I've needed to look for working grounds in my life that can act as a mirror to help me see what my mind is doing. And I think this is one of the reasons that quite a number of people choose to, or have chosen in the past, to work in team-based work livelihood or to live in communities. The people round about you soon let you know the things about yourself that you can't see on the surface. During the lockdown period that we've been experiencing, myself, I live in a small third floor flat, and I've been working from home. So a particular source of joy and freedom has been an allotment that I took on last spring. So I'd like to introduce you to my allotment experience a bit. So my allotment Buddha is Andrew, who has the plot next to me, to the left of my plot. Andrew is a horticulturalist, and his plot looks amazing. It looks like something you would get on a television gardening program or in the pages of a horticultural magazine. Beautiful rows of plants, weed-free in between, everything looking incredibly healthy and coming to fruit. And Andrew spends, it seems to me, no more than half an hour when he pops down to his plot, and yet it looks far better than mine does when I work on it for a whole day. So he is my vision of enlightenment on the allotment. And then there's Andrew, Wendy and Brian, and they have a plot two to the right of my plot. And I've learned a lot from Wendy. I asked Wendy one time, how long does it take? Is it possible to get rid of these weeds that keep coming back up when I pull them out? And Wendy said, yes, yeah, it was. I said, how long does it take? With an expectant look in my eyes. And she said, about 10 years. It wasn't really the answer I wanted to hear. But I see her when I'm down with her stool, because she's getting on in years, sitting on her stool, pulling up weeds. So that 10 years worth of work, it's got out the roots of those weeds which all gardeners know, like bindweed, for instance, dandelions, where even just a bit of root left in the soil means it's going to spring back up again, frustratingly, and reclaim the space. So she's done that work. And when she's doing her weeding, she's catching the weeds that have come across from other plots, probably my plot as well, that have come across from other plots and nipping them in the bud before they have a chance to put down those roots, which means that they'll be stuck there, needing a good few years' work. Along the edge of her polytunnel, she's got the most beautiful foxgloves. And the thing is that she didn't plant them. They just landed there. They landed there, and she left them because they're lovely and the bees like them. So she kept them, looked after them. And also on their plot, they have got the most beautiful rows of vegetables that they chose, that they wanted to be there for the qualities and fruits of those particular vegetables. And I have to confess for myself that I had to make some difficult decisions with regards to how much attention I give to my plot. With working full time and not being put on furlough, and really being desperate for a retreat, I chose to do a 6-week meditation course along with working full time, rather than doing lots of planting for the summer. And as a result, I've got a few things, but it's a bit of a thin, slim pickings compared to the plots round about me. And of course, I since had to live with that decision to actually do that. And I also admit that whereas on one side I had the paragon of horticultural excellence, the plot on the other side of me was empty for a while and quite a lot of weeds. And I allowed myself to be a bit influenced by that, rather than striving constantly to raise my standards to the standards of Andrew. They slipped a bit at times in the direction of allowing a few more weeds on my plot than might otherwise be a good idea. Because I thought, oh, there's so much weeds, there's so many weeds next door to me. Can I really keep up with this weeding? Is it really going to be worthwhile? However, more recently, a new plot holder moved in. It was all motivated, like brand new, and he got stuck in planting. And I have to say that when I saw David's handiwork, I became a little bit ashamed that I'd allowed some of my plot to get a little bit more weed covered. I felt I was letting the side down there. So an interesting thing that I've found, not to give myself too hard a time about not keeping the side up, one interesting thing that I've found is that I needed to let things be for a while. I couldn't just come up with a plan, get stuck in, and produce this ideal blueprint of what a garden should look like. I found that I needed to let it be for a bit. And I learned that part of gardening lore is actually to let the plants grow themselves and see what grows where, because you learn about the land, you learn about the qualities of the soil, you learn about which parts of your plot are better for which types of plant by letting them get on with it themselves for a bit. And when I did come to plant things, and a couple of rows of potatoes and some other crops, I would find that, especially in the case of the potatoes, I would find that right in the middle of my rows, they grow really well at one end, really well at the other end, and then nothing in between, mysteriously nothing. And then back over here where I had my kale, I would find these potatoes, really healthy potatoes growing up, because there used to be some potatoes there. In fact, they did better than the ones that I planted. So there's an expression in Buddhism, let the mind roam in its natural state. And what I've learned from years of being an idealistic person who liked to put systems onto things is that to become familiar with my mind, I need to give it a bit of space to roam in its natural state, to see what kind of plants are there, to see what shape they are, and that I need witnessing, a mirror, if you like, of some kind, whether it's other people or writing or something I'm creating, that lets me see what's there, that lets me work out what kind of plants they are and whether I want to keep them or not before I start to work to some kind of system. So I'm going to read a bit now about the next section that is about refugees. Not even in a shower of money is satisfaction of desires to be found. Worldly pleasures are of little relish, indeed painful. Thus, understanding, the spiritually mature person takes no delight even in heavenly pleasures. Disciple of the fully, perfectly enlightened one takes delight only in the destruction of craving. Many people, out of fear, flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, and trees, and shrines. In reality, this is not a safe refuge. In reality, this is not the best refuge. Fleeing to such a refuge, one is not released from all suffering. He who goes for refuge to the Enlightened One, to the truth and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the Four Noble Truths, namely suffering, the origin of suffering, the passing beyond suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Way leading to the pacification of suffering. For such a one, this is a safe refuge. For such a one, this is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. So you might have recognized that when I was talking about the allotment, especially Wendy and Brian's plot, that I was talking about the four right efforts, which is a stage of the Noble Eightfold Path, perfect effort. Another way of being close to the Buddha is through practicing what he practiced, his teaching. As the Buddha was fond of telling us, practicing in this way is the true refuge. And it's really possible when absorbed in practice to have a sense of the presence of the Buddha. So I wanted to, in connection with refugees, bring in what I've noticed has had the strongest effect on me personally. And that is tasting the fruit of my actions. So really giving time and attention to what has actually been the result of the things that I've done and not done. And my question for you all is how much time and attention do you give yourself to really tasting the fruits of your actions or choices? And I must admit, with the allotment, that I really rubbed my face in it, as it were. I really looked at the beautiful vegetables that people had on either side of me, and my kind of much more meagre, modest number of vegetables, and said to myself, this is because you practiced that 6-week meditation course rather than doing lots of planting earlier in the year. You know, that's for one example. And I had to ask myself again, was that worth it, doing the meditation course? You know, I thought, yeah, it was worth it. So I was training myself in accepting the consequences of my actions and not having getting into a kind of poor me sort of dialogue of some kind, saying, yeah, okay, that's how it is. That's how it is. Yeah. So putting aside time to really, really look at it. I must admit, I often find it easier to not think about it too much or to look away if it feels difficult. But it's been the times that I've been able to really look at it and let myself feel it and experience it that have changed me, where I've got the energy to do something differently in a more mature way. So the last section that I've identified is about the spiritual community. It's hard to go against the grain. It's much easier to go along with what everybody else is doing and what's there in popular culture or the culture around us. And to even know that there are alternatives. This is kept alive by communities like the spiritual community who keep alive the Dharma. So with the support of the spiritual community, we have the opportunity to remove our limitations of mind, to move from small-mindedness to big-heartedness, even to universal wisdom and compassion. Move into the Dharma itself, to be in alignment with the way things really are, to become trackless. Adding nothing to experience, taking nothing away from experience, but living fully and richly, moment to moment, one with all of life. So as I read the closing verses of the chapter, I invite you to send your appreciation from your heart to one another as being bearers of the Dharma, of keeping it alive and keeping it available, giving us all the opportunity of living the spiritual life, of having an alternative, of having support for going against the grain, and of becoming more light in our footsteps, or even trackless. Hard to come by is the awakened one. He is not born everywhere. Where such a wise one is born, that family grows happy. Happy is the appearance of the enlightened ones. Happy is the teaching of the real truth. Happy is the unity of the spiritual community. Happy is the spiritual effort of the united. He who reverences those worthy of reverence, whether enlightened ones or their disciples, those who have transcended illusion and passed beyond grief and lamentation, the one who reverences those who are of such a nature, who moreover are at peace and without cause for fear, his merit is not to be reckoned by any measure. So the last way that we can be close to the Buddha is to be close to the Dharma itself, is to become one with the way things really are, which is to wake up. Thank you.